Who's actually running the Pokemon world? Because I've got news for you, it's definitely not the government. In fact, I'm not even sure governments exist in the traditional sense. And once you notice this, you can't stop seeing how absolutely wild the power structure of this world actually is. I spent way too much time mapping out who's actually in charge of various cities and regions, and what I found is basically an anarcho-capitalism disguised as a children's cartoon. There are no elected officials, there's no federal system. The closest thing to law enforcement is an army of identical women named Jenny who apparently have jurisdiction everywhere despite answering to nobody. But here's the really fascinating part, this isn't an oversight. The Pokemon world is deliberately structured this way, and when you understand why, you'll realize that the entire society is held together by the most insane power structure in fiction. I'm talking about a world where might literally makes right, where corporations have more authority than any government, and where the closest thing to a president is whoever can beat up everyone else's pets the best. Stick with me, because we're about to explore a political system so bizarre that it makes actual anarchy look organized. Let's start with the most obvious question, where are the mayors, where are the governors, where are literally any political leaders in any city that Ash visits? I went through every major city in Kanto, and you know what I found? Nothing. Pallet Town has Professor Oak, who's a scientist, not a leader. Viridian City has a gym leader. Pewter City has Brock, who runs the gym and apparently just decides things for the city by default. Cerulean City is run by Misty's sisters, who are gym leaders and performers. Seeing a pattern here? The gym leaders are the de facto authorities in their cities, but they're not elected, they're not appointed by any government, and their authority seems to come entirely from the fact that they're strong trainers. That's it. You're good at Pokemon battles, so now you get to make decisions for an entire city. This is insane. Imagine if in our world, the person who was best at basketball got to run their city. That's essentially what's happening here, except instead of basketball, it's My Electric Rat can beat up your water turtle. But it gets weirder, because gym leaders aren't even the top of the power structure. They answer to the Pokemon League, which is this mysterious organization that apparently has authority over all regions, but also somehow doesn't. The league sets the rules for battles, certifies trainers, and controls who can challenge the Elite Four, but they don't seem to have any power over non-trainers or any say in how cities are actually run day to day. So who handles normal governance stuff? Who maintains roads? Who funds schools? Who collects taxes? The answer appears to be nobody, or possibly corporations, or maybe it just happens by magic. The anime never shows us because apparently this world just runs on vibes and the assumption that everything will work out. Now let's talk about law enforcement, because this is where things get really funny. The only cops in the entire Pokemon world are Officer Jenny's, and I have so many questions about this system. First of all, they're all identical. Every single Officer Jenny looks exactly the same, to the point where the only way to tell them apart is by their location. Are they clones? Are they a family of identical cousins? Is there a Jenny factory somewhere producing law enforcement officers? But more importantly, who do they work for? They're in every city in every region, suggesting some kind of unified police force. But there's no federal government coordinating them. There's no police department hierarchy that we ever see. They just exist in every location with identical uniforms and authority that apparently extends everywhere, despite nobody actually employing them or setting their jurisdiction. It's like someone said we need police in this world, and just copy-pasted the same character into every location without thinking about how law enforcement actually works as a system. And what do the Jennies actually do? Mostly they arrest Team Rocket when Ash defeats them, which raises the question, if the Jennies have authority to arrest criminals, why don't they just do that themselves? Why is law enforcement in this world entirely dependent on 10-year-old children battling the criminals first, and then calling the cops to pick up the defeated villains? The answer, I think, is that the Jennies don't actually have real power. They're mall cops at best. They can arrest small-time criminals who are already defeated, but they can't actually stop crime from happening because they lack the force projection that Pokemon trainers have. They're the illusion of law enforcement in a world where actual power comes from Pokemon's strength. So if gyms and Jennies aren't really running things, who is? Well, let me introduce you to the actual powers in the Pokemon world. Corporations in the Pokemon League operating in this bizarre partnership that would make libertarians weep with joy. Silphcoat in Kanto, Devon Corporation in Hoenn, These aren't just businesses, they're the infrastructure of society. They make the Pokeballs, the potions, the technology that makes Pokemon training possible. And because they control these essential resources, they have more real power than any gym leader or league official. Think about what this means. If Silphco decided to triple the price of Pokeballs, what's anyone going to do about it? There's no antitrust laws, no regulatory body, no government that can step in and say, hey, you can't monopolize essential technology. Silphco could hold the entire world hostage, and the only recourse would be what, exactly? The corporations in the Pokemon world have the kind of unchecked power that would make Gilded Age robber barons jealous. They control resources, they control technology, and there's literally no democratic oversight or regulation limiting what they can do. And the Pokemon League? They're not a government, they're more like a combination of a sports organization and a religious institution. They set the rules for how Pokemon battles work, they certify who's strong enough to be considered elite, and they maintain this mythology that the strongest trainers are the most worthy leaders. But they don't provide services, they don't maintain infrastructure. They don't collect taxes or create laws. They're a prestige system that legitimizes power structures without actually governing anything. Here's my theory about what actually happened to create this bizarre system, and this connects back to the war theory we talked about earlier. I think traditional governments existed in the Pokemon world before the war, and they collapsed completely during or immediately after the conflict. Think about what a war fought with Pokemon would do to government authority. Your entire military is dependent on trainers and their Pokemon. Your infrastructure is being destroyed by creatures that can control elements and reshape terrain. Your population is being decimated, your institutions are falling apart, and when the dust settles, who's left standing? The strongest trainers. The people who survived because they had powerful Pokemon. The corporations that manufactured the technology that kept trainers alive. That's it. Those are the survivors, and they're the ones who rebuilt society. But they didn't rebuild governments. They built something else. They created the league system, where power is determined by strength in battle. They let corporations handle infrastructure and resources, because there was no government left to regulate them. They established gyms as the local authority structures because gym leaders were the ones who survived and had the power to protect their communities. What we're seeing in the Pokemon world isn't a functioning government. It's a post-collapse society that never bothered to rebuild democratic institutions because the system that emerged from the chaos worked well enough that nobody questioned it. And honestly, it kind of does work, at least from what we see. Cities function, people seem happy, crime is relatively minor and always gets stopped by trainer intervention. It's not a good system, but it's a stable one, and maybe after a devastating war, stable is good enough. But let's talk about what this means for how the world actually operates, because once you understand the power structure, everything makes way more sense. Each region is basically independent because there's no federal authority binding them together. Kanto has its league, Johto has its league, and they might coordinate for events like the Olympic-style tournaments we see, but there's no higher authority making them cooperate. They're separate power structures that happen to use similar systems. This explains why every region has completely different roles and cultures. There's no central government standardizing things. Each region developed its own system based on whoever was strongest after the war and whatever corporations had influence there. It's not a unified nation, it's a collection of independent territories held together by the loose association of the Pokemon League system. And within each region, power is incredibly decentralized. Gym leaders run their cities as semi-independent fiefdoms. The Elite Four and champions serve as the ultimate authority, but mostly they just sit around waiting for challengers and occasionally dealing with major threats. Day-to-day governance is handled by whoever steps up to do it, I guess. This is why Team Rocket can operate so openly. There's no FBI equivalent to coordinate law enforcement across regions. There's no regulatory body to shut down their operations. The only thing stopping them is trainers who decide to intervene, and law enforcement that can only act after criminals have already been defeated. It's vigilante justice formalized into a system. The Jennies exist to create the illusion of official law enforcement, but the real work is done by random trainers who happen to care about stopping crime. Now here's where this gets really interesting. This isn't just a power structure, it's practically a religion. The Pokemon League is treated with this reverence like being a champion is the ultimate achievement, not just in training but in life itself. Think about how the league functions. You go on a pilgrimage, collecting badges from the ordained leaders in various locations. You prove your worth through trials. You ascend through levels of authority until you reach the Elite Four, the high priests of this system. And if you're truly worthy, you can challenge the champion, the closest thing this world has to a god king. It's not just about being strong, it's about being recognized as worthy by the system. The badges aren't just achievements, they're blessings. The League isn't just an organization, it's the source of legitimacy and meaning in this world. And what's the central message of this religion? Strength is virtue, power is proof of worth. If you're strong enough to become champion, you deserve to have authority. Not because you were elected or because you have good policies, but because you beat everyone else in a fight. This is might makes right formalized into a societal structure and everyone just accepts it as normal. Ash doesn't question why the strongest trainer should have authority, he just accepts that becoming champion is the ultimate goal and that the system is legitimate because that's how the world works. It's actually kind of dystopian when you think about it too hard, but it's also brilliant in its simplicity. You don't need complex political systems or democratic processes. You just need a way to determine who's strongest and they get to be in charge. Done. Democracy solved, except not really because this isn't democracy at all. It's just organized feudalism with extra steps. Let me give you the perfect example of how this system works in practice, the Indigo Plateau. This is supposedly the seat of power for the Pokemon League in Kanto and Johto, right? The Elite Four and Champion are here. This is where the ultimate battles happen. But what does the League actually do from this location? They host tournaments, they certify trainers, they maintain the infrastructure for battles. That's it. They're not making laws, they're not providing services, they're not governing anything. They're just running the world's most important sports league, and somehow that gives them authority over society. Imagine if FIFA ran the world government. That's basically what's happening here. The organization that oversees Pokemon battles is the closest thing to a central authority, and their only real power is determining who's the best at fighting with magical creatures. And you know what? Nobody seems to mind. The citizens of the Pokemon world appear perfectly content with this arrangement. They accept that gym leaders run their cities, that corporations control resources, that the league determines prestige, and that law enforcement is just a bunch of identical women who show up after children solve all the actual problems. Maybe this is what happens when a society collapses and rebuilds without anyone questioning whether the new system actually makes sense. People just accept whatever emerges from the chaos as long as it's better than the alternative. Or maybe everyone in the Pokemon world is so focused on training and battling that they don't care about political structures. Why worry about democratic representation when you can just catch a Pikachu and go on an adventure? Here's what really gets me though. This system creates this weird outcome where regional identity is incredibly strong. People identify with their region's league, their region's champion, their region's style of training. There's no national identity because there's no nation. There's just regions with their own power structures. This explains why champions are such a big deal and why everyone knows who they are. They're not just the strongest trainers, they're the symbol of regional identity and pride. Lance represents Kanto and Johto, Steven represents Hoenn. They're like monarchs, except their authority comes from being good at Pokemon battles instead of heredity. It's the most meritocratic monarchy ever conceived. You can't inherit the throne, you have to battle for it. But once you win, you're basically royalty until someone stronger comes along and knocks you off. This is Pokemon democracy in action. Whoever's strongest runs the world. It's not about votes or representation or policies. It's about power, pure and simple. The strongest trainer becomes champion, and that gives them authority. The strongest businesses control resources. The strongest gym leaders run their cities. Strength isn't just respected in the Pokemon world. It's literally the law. The entire social contract is based on the idea that might makes right, and if you don't like it, you can challenge the system by becoming strong enough to change it yourself. And honestly, from a narrative perspective, this is genius. It justifies why 10-year-old kids can be protagonists who matter. In a normal society, Ash would be a child with no authority or influence. But in this system, if Ash becomes strong enough, he can have as much power as anyone else regardless of his age. It's wish fulfillment, but it's also a consistent power structure that makes sense within the world's logic. So what's the answer to our original question? Who's actually running the Pokemon world? The answer is the strongest trainers, the biggest corporations, and a quasi-religious organization that legitimizes the whole arrangement. There's no government in the traditional sense. There's just power, distributed based on who has the strongest Pokemon and who controls the most resources. It's an arco-capitalism meets feudalism meets a sports league, and somehow it works well enough that society functions.
Cities have infrastructure, people are fed and housed, crime gets stopped eventually, and everyone seems reasonably happy despite living in a system that would make political scientists weep.
Maybe in the Pokemon world, strength isn't just respected, it's law, it's government, it's religion, it's the entire basis of social organization. And maybe that's not even a bad thing given that the alternative was the complete collapse of civilization during a war that nearly destroyed everything. Or maybe everyone in this world is just really, really bad at political science and they've convinced themselves that whoever wins the most Pokemon battles gets to be in charge is a reasonable system of governance. Either way, I kind of love how absolutely bonkers this power structure is. It shouldn't work, but it does, and that's probably the most unrealistic thing about a world where 10-year-olds walk around with fire-breathing dragons. What do you think? Would you want to live in a world where strength determines authority, or is this system completely insane? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely can't decide if this is the best or worst political system ever conceived. We'll stick around for the best Pokemon channel that exists, I guess. I mean, probably anyways.